Hello. This is Derek from One Over Tea. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. Alright, so in that last two episodes, I covered the history of pu'er. I went really deep into the ancient history of the land and the modern history of the factories making the pressed tea. What I should be doing in this episode is getting into my sourcing trips in Linsang, where I source the pu'er teas, because the way I structure these episodes, I'll have the history, I'll have the sourcing, I'll have the making, I'll have the drinking of a particular tea type. However, right now we're hitting the end of the year. It's the beginning of the next year in 2024. And I feel a little reflective, I guess. I started Tea Soup in January of 2023. And a lot of times when you start something the first week of January with a big new project, a lot of times you'll do it for a week, like going to the gym. And then after a few weeks, you're like, okay, maybe it's not my thing for this year. And so it kind of started as almost a New Year's resolution, but I managed to make 25 episodes, right? And so that's almost it's almost every other week. I took a few months off for sourcing when I was really busy with the tea and stuff like that, but I was hitting every week for a while there. And I really want to continue pushing this out into the 2024 because already, 25 episodes at 45 minutes each, or a little more than 45 minutes each, that's 18 hours of this radio announcer voice of mine telling you stories about tea, my stories, the histories. It's really crazy. Really thinking about how much time I've spent here recording. You could almost listen to my voice for an entire day nonstop. Just wild. Really amazing what you can accomplish in a single year. And really looking back at what I did in 2023, I think that'll be the topic of this episode, is all the tea stuff that's happened in 2023. Just a brief overview, because I've been getting into the nitty-gritty details in the actual episodes. But as far as 2023 goes, Tea Soup is probably my favorite thing that I've done. It's so great, and all of the feedback is just incredible. So while the information sharing is really important and rewarding for me, driving me and everything, it's really your feedback that's helped keep this fire going for the project. I mean, I can't tell you how many kind words of encouragement, words of support I've received through the emails, through the admin at onerivertea.com, or direct messages through the Instagram. These comments really mean the world to me. And just as you feel closer with the people making these teas, the stories I tell, I'm sure you feel closer with me, and I feel closer with all of you, because as you noticed, I do a lot of these tea sourcing trips by myself. I do it solo. They're stories that just stick with me and, the people I meet in the mountains. And that was part of the reason I wanted to do Tea Soup, because if these stories only live within me, and then I forget them, then the stories just disappear. And by creating this podcast, I can kind of share these stories with you, and then I don't feel so alone on my odysseys of sourcing tea. And so really, a huge thank you to you guys, because I feel, a little more connected with everyone. So when you reach out to me, I feel like we're in this thing together. So thank you so much for all of the support, all of the kind words. And naturally, while the direct messages sent to me mean so much, leaving a public message, leaving a public review would do a whole lot for making this a little more noticeable for everyone else, right? And so if you haven't yet, please give this podcast a rating and a review, whether you listen to it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to it. See what you can to kind of get the word out, because, I'm going to keep trying to hit it at least every other week in 2024 as well. So again, the topic for this episode is all about a look back over the year. I find this incredibly helpful year after year to think about all you've accomplished and kind of orient yourself for what you want to accomplish in the next 12 months because we have this very wonderful system of actual measuring what we've accomplished every year. Some people don't like it. I find it's very useful to really orient myself, point myself and plan for the future. And so in this episode, I'm going to go all the way back to, January of 2023 and kind of talk about what trends were happening within tea that I was looking at, what teas I was sourcing, how One River Tea and also Tao Teaware has grown in the past year. And then also, just what it's like living in China as an expatriate, as a business owner, and most of all, as a person of tea. And so the way I do this, I'll have to kind of come clean with you guys and tell you a little bit about maybe a potential character flaw that I have that maybe I haven't told you, but is likely the reason that I have such a good memory for all of these stories. I am a compulsive documenter. I take photos of everything. I take notes, I write poems, I have notebooks of to-do lists, work projects, scraps of paper that I just don't throw away because they have a little bit of information, insight into my process during that time that I would like to study and take and bring into the future as well. I have audio notes, so much. Speaking of poetry, I have 35 completely filled unlined moleskin notebooks. I think they all have 192 pages, and I write on the front and back of all the pages. I have 35 of these filled with poetry from the past 11 years. I have a dream journal of audio notes on my iPhone, which I update, whenever I have a dream that sticks with me. I have 8 SIM cards, both the 64 gigabyte micro ones and the 128 gigabyte full ones, completely filled with photos, videos, drone footage. I have, this is the most embarrassing part, on my actual iPhone and iCloud, the last I checked, I have 141,003 photos and videos. And these are all, if I'm talking to you about a story about Wen Zitong, about, my time in Taimyshan, all I do is open my phone and I scroll back to that date and I have 300, 400 photos of that trip. And then I just walk chronologically through it. And this really helps jog my memory. And so this is kind of what I'll be doing this year, is kind of going back month by month and be like, oh, what were the trends? And start and analyzing, where I was emotionally, what I was thinking about, what I was projecting, what I was trying to accomplish, and then kind of look at it again and see, did I accomplish it? So one thing, to explain a little bit why I have so many photos, I love taking photos for fun. This is kind of my thing. It's the process. I just go out in the evenings and the afternoons, take photos, walk around the city. I'll come home with 100 photos. People ask me what do you do with all the photos? And the short answer is not a lot, not much. Sometimes nothing. As I said, I enjoy the process. I enjoy looking at the world through the camera lens, looking for instances and moments that would make a great photo. Moments of surprise, wonder, great compositions, juxtapositions, somebody walking right through as the billboard behind them says something else and their facial expression says something different. I love making the familiar seem strange, the mundane magical. I seek beauty in banality and wonder in the daily drudgery of life. And for me, this is what photography can do. And getting back to those numbers, I'll go out and take maybe 100, 200 photos of the city, and I'll go home, and the most, if I were to share, I would maybe share 9 of those photos, maybe 6, oftentimes none. For me, it's not necessarily about the results, it's the process, that sudden magic of finding that magnificent photo. And this reminds me of a story I heard, and looking it up, it seems like there are many different renditions. It's probably not a real story, but my friend told me it under the guise of a photography professor in a university. Every year he split his class in half. In half the class, he said he would grade on the quantity of photos. Say, okay, you have to take 300 photos by the end of the semester. 300 photos is an A, 250 photos is a B, 200 photos is a C, etc. Just get 300 photos. The other half of the class, he said, all you have to do is create one beautiful photo and you can get an A. It's just based on, how good the quality of that one photo is. The other class part of the class based on their quantity. Now, naturally, it sounds like, okay, yeah, simple quantity over quality kind of situation, right? What's better, quality or quantity? Obviously, we want something of quality over something of quantity. However, the really strange thing happens that year after year, the best photo every time came out of the students who had to take 300 photos. They had one photo in that mix of 300 that was just absolutely stunning. Well, the class that had the quality assignment only had to take one photo, was just obsessed with the theory behind it, thinking about it, what could make a great photo. They would maybe have 10 photos that they think were the best, but the other side had a whole semester of taking bad photos and learning from the bad photos what they want to make a good photo. And so through this process of trial, of error, and getting back to this another adage, this fake it till you make it, I mean, this is the method of growth. This is the method of change. And so when I go out taking these photos, I'm really just looking for that one moment of magical inspiration, that sudden catch. And I've heard this story in the guise of ceramic teachers, of painting teachers saying, oh, you have, 1,000 bad pots in you, 1,000 bad paintings in you. And you have to get those 1,000 bad paintings out of you before you can start getting to the good stuff. And so part of the work is just that grind. It's just work, try. And what's really wonderful about this is sometimes there's no real shortcut to it. But that also means, like, the more you put in work to this, the harder it is for other people to catch up to you. Because if they want to be as good as you, they have to go through it. They have to put in the practice. They have to do it. Of course, there's a little bit of natural talent that could come, but after that, it's just a long slog grind. And so really, like, don't worry so much about creating an actual perfect thing first. The moral of the story is just try. Do it poorly. It's okay. Don't wait until you can do it absolutely flawlessly, because perfection comes from that fine-tuning of your failures. The more you fail, the more potential you have to grow, the more you can learn. And so, yeah, for me, this is getting back all the way through photos, past photos, into me starting this podcast at the beginning of last year. It was my first podcast. It was my first time ever doing this. And now I have, of actual recorded content over 18 hours, right, that somebody is going to have to catch up to kind of be as experienced as I am doing this. And then also there's all the edits, all of the practice, all of the typing and everything. I have a whole year of experience. And so for me, I'm just patting myself on the back here. Sorry, but for me, I'm very proud of it. And I think this is the mentality I would like to carry into 2024, where, if you want to do something good, first you have to do it bad. First, you have to learn from how you don't want to do it, and then, just get better and better and better. And this kind of comes back full circle, too, to the tea companies, the tea company and the Teaware company. A large part of that is that fake it till you make it mentality, where it's like the first couple of years, I'm like, yeah, sure, it's going to work. We're doing really great here. And then eventually it's like that sarcasm drops away, and I'm like, wow, we're doing really great here. It is going to work. And it's like, it's just this flip. Anyways, I hit that tangent talking about how many photos I have, the documentations I do and all that, because as I go through this year, what I do is I just look through all the photos month by month and kind of see the progression. And it really helps vividly remind myself of every place I was at, everything I was doing month by month. And so let's get back to it, the beginning of 2023, because a lot has changed in China, in the world, and then also within tea and within my life. So going back to the very beginning of January in 2023, I actually spent the first day of January with a very good friend, Dylan from The Sweetest Dew. If you guys are in the tea scene, you probably know Dylan, you know The Sweetest Dew, he's been living in China for a long time, and so have I. And this was the first time, just the year before last, that we actually met. And I actually got him a job at the English school, the training center I work for, to get the visa. And now I guess I need to stop here and kind of tell you guys, one of the ways that I'm able to live in China full time without a Chinese wife, without a marriage passport, without the green card or whatever, is through a work visa. And in 2022 or 2021, I tried to open a Chinese company, create my own company and give myself work visa, but the Chinese government is very strict on these kinds of rules, and they would rather, it's way easier if I just get employed by a Chinese company. And so when I first came to China in 2016, it was through an English teaching job. And sorry, I'm telling this story in reverse. Going back even further, in the US, I opened up a tea house with some friends. This is called the Mana Bar. It's actually still around in Lawrence, Kansas, the college town where I graduated. And I had some friends who were working in an herb shop. And then the herb shop closed down, and we started this Mana Bar, and I was responsible for all of the Chinese teas. At the same time, oh my gosh, stepping further back, at that time, I was studying, Chinese languages and cultures in university, a little bit of ethnobotany, looking at the different herbs that different cultures used. I was studying anthropology. I was very fascinated by all of this. And eventually I settled on East Asian languages and cultures because it has a little bit of everything. It has philosophy, psychology, history, poetry, art, herbalism. It's really just a deep ethnographic dive into a whole other culture that a lot of American textbooks kind of skate over. So anyway, through that, I started getting connected to something I'd never really explored before. And then another thing was the ethnobotany class with Kelly Kincher. He was an incredible professor that would do prairie walks through the wetlands and identify all of the herbs you're always just walking by. And he's like, oh, this root has, this chemical compound that's used to treat cancer in certain products. And you just realize that medicine is growing all around you. There's this huge connection that we lack between us and the earth. And so that's something I was growing into. And then my love for anthropology just got tied to the Chinese languages and cultures because, as I mentioned previously in the podcast, Chinese poetry was, my first love for China because the poetry is so simple, so clean, and it's pastoral in a way where nature is sacred. And these are all, portraits of the divine, like seeing a landscape and hearing the bird calls and the crickets and the cicadas, seeing the crescent moon fall and the frost on the ground sparkle. It's all magic. It's all the natural world beyond the natural world, to borrow a phrase from Nietzsche. Sorry, I had to grab Twilight of the Idols and get that right. So it's in a section, How the Real World at Last Became a Myth. And he talks about the real world versus the apparent world, right? And the apparent world is everything you believe it to be, and the real world being this thing that is actually there. And so much of our lives, we live in this world of, what we perceive to be the truth and not actually the truth. Again, it's for me, walking in the fields with Kelly Kincher and seeing, like, these are the trees I pass by every day, and I've just looked at them and I've thought they're trees, but no, that's an elm, that's an oak, this willow bark has medicinal value, and just seeing the world in a whole new light. For me, this also ties back into the idea that I think in his heart, Nietzsche, his philosophy has a lot in common with Taoism, with Chinese philosophy of, like true enlightenment and stuff like that. Like, we have to destroy the perceived world in order to arrive at the truly natural world, the actual world. And I think like one of Nietzsche's favorite philosophers, and then he hated him, it was Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer had a lot of insights into Eastern philosophy. And also a lot of the translations of Eastern philosophy into the West came around the turn of the century with Freud and Jung and that whole, spring of new ideas. So for me, getting back into my choices to study, there was a lot of really interesting thoughts that kind of were simplified in Chinese philosophy from what I was getting with the very verbose Western philosophy and the really cerebral, overly intellectual, sometimes cold and analytic types of English poetry. After graduating with my East Asian languages and cultures degree, the next question is, when are you going to go to China? And, I didn't want to go to China for a week or 2 weeks and do like a really fast trip. I wanted to experience the living culture. I wanted to be like the poets of old and walk through mountains and, greet farmers and villagers and drink with people and have these really incredible moments of bliss and beauty. And one of the only ways to really get over to China was to get a job, to get that 1 year visa. And the easiest way for me to do that was to teach English. And so that's eventually how I decided on teaching English in China, because it would get me into China for a long period of time where I could really start understanding the culture, practice my language. And then, of course, there's that subcurrent of seeking tea and walking through mountains. And that eventually manifested and with One River Tea. But I bring this all up because that's something I don't think I've mentioned on this podcast. The fact that even though I'm doing Tao Teaware for the teaware, One River Tea for the tea, I'm also teaching English. I'm also working another job. And so this is my side project. This is my side passion, this Tea Soup podcast. And so as I go through this year in 2023, I'll kind of bring up a little bit about the work and stuff like that, because this was, with Dylan, the sweetest dude, the first time I had somebody in the tea world, also in my Yangzhou world, also in my teaching English in China world. And they had this beautiful overlap. And so I really cherished that time we had together, because we would drink tea every week. And so looking back at the beginning of this year, I see something that, was there for a brief moment, because now Dylan is in Suzhou and we don't drink tea very often, but we used to drink tea every week. I'd see him all the time. And it's just so nice to have somebody from, like I said, two worlds colliding. Another thing that I realized I was really into at the beginning of the year in January was aged white tea. And I'm looking right now at this year, like this time last year, I was drinking so much aged white tea, like the 2015 Bai Mudan, 2017 Bai Mudan, seeing all the different aged teas I could get from my tea connections, my friends, and I was doing a whole lot of research into that. Naturally, I was also doing the tea soup episodes on white tea, and so it all kind of came hand in hand. For me, aged white tea in the wintertime is really good because of the TCM, the traditional Chinese medicine, the zhongyi, because different teas have different energies. Getting back into Chinese philosophy, a lot of this comes from the yin and yang idea of the universe, where you have yang energies and yin energies, and their constant interplay, their different fractions, manifest the whole world. And so certain teas might have more yang energy or more yin energies. Certain people have a yin deficiency, a yang deficiency. Yang is the masculine principle, it's heat, it's fire. Yin is the feminine principle, it's cooling, it's receding, it's retracting. And so aged white tea is rather neutral, but still slightly warming. For somebody like me, I've strong yang qi. I typically run very hot. I can withstand a whole lot of cold. And so for me, if I drink something that's really warming, like I personally don't really like red teas, just because they don't make my body feel that good, right? And so the red teas are really warming energies, where I like the cooling energies. I like the sheng pu'er, I like fresh white tea. And so if I do like something that's warming, I'll pick something that's a little warming, like a roasted oolong or aged white tea. I won't pick something really, really warming like cooked pu'er or red tea. So this year, actually, what I am drinking is Anhua Heicha. I've been drinking a whole lot of Anhua Heicha because this fermented tea, it's not as strong as cooked pu'er. The fermentation's still pretty mild, and it still has this really nice warming currents to it. So again, just a little bit of comparison. I remember doing a video. I was also trying to get into the podcast, getting into the YouTubes, and I did a video with Dylan, and we were unboxing a bunch of white tea I got. This is a very vivid memory, but I also have like a video from it. It's a 30-minute video I shot with my Fuji XT camera. I still didn't quite know how to use it for video, and so I had the focus on manual, and I had it like zoom into something that I showed, and then it stayed zoomed in the whole time. Like the focal point is too close, everything became blurry. And so the whole episode, or the video I recorded, 3/4 of it is just totally blurred out. But it was a good memory of me receiving a whole bunch of teas from Cho, my white tea producer, a whole different range of 2015 Bai Mudan, 2017 Bai Mudan, and a few other specifics of different years, different types. And we unboxed them together, smelled them, and it was a very, very surreal, visceral, wonderful experience. So that's really what I was into in the wintertime. Also in China, what usually happens in late January, early February is the Spring Festival. In Chinese, they do the Lunar New Year. And so their year switches over in late January, or it did last year. And so around this time in January, I was also spending a lot of time with my tea master, Master Yinwei. And if you caught the episode where I talk about our relationship, it is very interesting where it's kind of like a true apprenticeship or like a father-son relationship where I'm always there to support him. He's always around to support me, and usually I visit him all the time right around now during Spring Festival because his wife a few years ago passed away, and he's been really lonely on the holiday times because his daughter lives in another city and she usually doesn't come home because she has to spend time with her husband's family. And so he's all by himself during Spring Festival, one of the most family oriented holidays of the Chinese year. And so I usually just spend a lot of time in the tea house, just hanging out with him, drinking tea, watching the shop while he plays mahjong and cooks food. And so I see a lot of him in these photos as well of like late January. And then during Spring Festival, I have some time off of work. And so that's another thing to realize. One thing that I'm, rather pleased about, a lot of my tea sourcing happens on my weekends. And so I've gotten really incredible at leaving work. I have like Monday, Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday off, leaving work Sunday night and getting on a sleeper train, going to another city, getting out into like a village or whatever, and then in 2 days, walking through the mountains, meeting people, making connections, and then going back into work. And so a lot of people joke, my coworkers, where I'm like the busiest man alive because even when I'm not working, I'm working. Like it's just like, it reminds me of that Alice in Wonderland thing where she's running with the Red Queen and she's like, oh, it feels like we're not getting anywhere. And the Red Queen says, yeah, of course. Everyone's running to stay where they are, right? To get anywhere you really want to go, you have to run twice as fast. And that's for me, like that's kind of the name of the game. And there's maybe some exceptions to it, but none that I've really found other than, putting in that extra work. So again, during this time for Spring Festival, I had the time off work. And so I was spending time with my tea master last year in January. And then I was like, okay, I want to do a little bit of exploration of a place I haven't explored before. Usually what I can do is I can do some pre-sourcing because right now in January, no tea stuff is happening, but I can at least get into a tea region and kind of learn the ropes. I can learn how to get there, how long it takes to get from here to here. I can scope out different locations that I want to go to. That way, when I do have my 2-day weekend, I can get out there and just do it all very, very quickly. And so I decided to go to Shaoxing. Shaoxing is a small city just south of Hangzhou in Zhejiang, and they make a whole lot of Dragonwell green tea. But their Dragonwell green tea is a little different. They call it the Big Buddha Dragonwell. They use a different cultivar. It's called the Wuniuzao. They have this other cultivar that I think is very, very common and gets sold as Dragonwell out in a lot of places. And so my goal for this year, this is before I actually went to the Westlake Village with my tea master and met some very legitimate contacts that are making incredibly high quality Shifeng and Baihefeng peak Dragonwell, which was a few months later. I thought to myself, what would be really cool is I do this, essentially sourcing expose onto who's actually making the Dragonwell you're buying, right? And so I get out to Shaoxing and I see just the huge amounts of Dragonwell being sold out there, being made out there. I meet a few people, or actually really I only meet 2 people because again, this is Spring Festival when everyone's with their family. Everyone went home, so all the shops are closed. In China, it kind of closes down for at least 1, maybe 2 weeks. Like the small restaurants, the small shops, any small type of shop, which a lot of tea shops are small shops, they close down. And so really as a foreigner in China during this time, it can be a little lonely, but a lot of people like to travel. However, it's another one of these things where the Chinese government gives everyone in the country essentially the same time off, and so everyone travels during this time. And so if you go to like the Great Wall or Huangshan or one of those really iconic places during Spring Festival, you might get crushed. Like it's like this really, I remember somebody went to Huangshan and he was like, it's literally standing in line like Disney walking up a mountain There's so many people, and you just take a step and you wait, and you take another step and you wait. Anyways, so I went to a place that no one goes to, and as a result, no one was there. And let's see. So I finally met somebody, and he was invited me in. It was really awkward because they were eating their family dinner. It was like so many extended people, 3 big tables. The whole tea house was just filled with people where every other tea house was closed. And I kind of walk by and I look, and I feel like, one of those in a Christmas Carol, somebody outside a really warm church where everyone's feasting. And so the owner comes out and waves me inside, and I'm like, okay. And he's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, I'm looking for tea. And he's like, yeah, I sell tea. And I'm like, yeah, it is a tea house. I get his card, I get his information. And he tells me that very proudly that they sell a lot of their tea, to Hangzhou, like to the Westlake area people, and then they resell it. So he was very, very proud of that. And I was like, okay, this could be curious to come back to. But I never ended up getting a chance to come back there because I ended up going to the actual Westlake with my tea master, as I mentioned. The next thing I did is I went looking for traditional Big Buddha Dragon Well tea. It's called Big Buddha Dragon Well tea because there is the Dafo Simiao, which is the Big Buddha temple in that area, and it's been a temple for a long time. And I was like, you know what? Hangzhou has a lot of tea. There's a Big Buddha temple, Big Buddha tea. And I was like, maybe this temple is responsible for a lot of the tea that's being grown around in this region. I was also doing a lot of research for that, tea soup episode, the history of tea. And so the idea that intricate link between Buddhism and tea, and temples and tea, and the travel of tea throughout ancient China was really deep in my mind. And so I went looking for wild tea gardens behind the temple. And maybe I'll do a whole episode on it. I took a lot of videos because I did find it. I found, the manicured garden that they only pick and make in the tea in the temple for the monks. And then behind that, I found wild tea bushes that had just gone to seed. They were so bramble thick, hard to access. The villagers didn't drink them because they said it didn't taste good, which is another really funny part. Where I think in the West, we always like the idea of wild stuff. Like, oh my gosh, it's wild, it's organic, it must be really good. But no, like, the wild tea was cultivated to taste better, right? It's artificial selection. It's like a baby wolf is not the same as a puppy dog, right? And so eventually you breed only the baby wolf qualities, only the qualities you like into it, and you get something that stays, loyal, playful all of its life. So too with wild tea. You find the tea bushes that taste sweeter, that taste better, less bitter, and something like that. And you start cultivating specifically the flavors you want. And so all the villagers say, like, yeah, these are all the old tea bushes that no one drinks anymore because they're just not as good. Anyways, really cool, interesting video. I'll hopefully edit them sometime and put them up on YouTube. But another thing that was really exciting for me at that time is I just found out that they had just finished constructing a new leg of the high-speed train that connected Shaoxing with Tiantai-shan. And Tiantai-shan was a mountain that I wanted to go to ever since before I came to China. It was the home of this incredible Tang Dynasty poet, Huang Shan, Cold Mountain. And he lived in a cave outside of, the Guoqing temple on Tiantai-shan. And so I really, really wanted to go there, but it was really difficult to access because I don't have a car. I'm relying on trains, taxis, buses. And to get there, I would have to take, several long circuits. And I found out just now that it's 15 minutes away by the high-speed train that they just completed last year. And so I was like, okay, I'm done with my tea trip. Everyone's closed. I'm going to go to Tiantai, pay my respects to Hang Shan, and see if I can actually find his monastery. Because it wasn't in the Guoqing temple, it was off the slopes. And so maybe this will be a whole episode, but this was the book that, got me to China. It was the Collected Songs of Cold Mountain, translated by Bill Porter. And I actually sold tea, or I gave tea to somebody who was friends with Bill Porter. And at that time I was translating poetry, and we connected over poetry. He agreed to share some of my translations with Bill Porter. And I got into email contacts with Bill Porter, this incredible, prolific translator of Chinese poetry. he read my translations. He gave me, some really good feedback, and then also told me not to quit my day job. Thanks, Bill. But no, it was very, very heartfelt, very honest, and really, really good feedback to get. And so I messaged him. I sent him an email, and he replied like 6 hours later. I was like, hey, I'm actually going to Tiantaishan. I want to see where Han Shan's monastery is, where the cave where he was a recluse is. And Bill emailed me back right away with kind of details on how to get there. And so that was a really, really awesome sacred pilgrimage for me in like my life in China. And so for me, looking back at 2023 already, I'm like, dang, that was really fulfilling even in the first month. Guoqing Temple was another temple that I absolutely adore. It was built in the Sui dynasty like 600 AD. This is Tiantai Shan. And so Tiantai Buddhism was brought over to Japan, and they call it Tendai, I believe. And so this is where that kind of originated. And the Tiantai Mountains, even before Buddhism came, they were Taoist mountains. And so there were a lot of Taoist shrines on there. And so what you get is this really incredible confluence of Taoist ideas and Taoist history mixed with modern Buddhism as in like 500 AD. And then you see this development of, supposedly like pre-Chan, pre-Zen Buddhism. Also, another thing is the tea in the West Lake in Hangzhou supposedly first came from the Tiantai Mountains, came from a monk from the Guoqing Temple. And as I was walking through Han Shan's mountain cave retreat, where the cave where he lived a lot of his life, I saw old, huge, wild tea bushes everywhere. And so it's just really cool to kind of piece all these things together by getting out into the world and looking at history and then walking through. And so for me, if you remember earlier in this episode talking about the nature walks with Kelly Kincher, like I really felt like this was the throwback to that, where I'm walking through the real world beyond the apparent world. I've dropped the illusion of the Platonic images of trees, and I'm perceiving everything truly as it is. Anyways, that was a really, really wonderful experience. A lot of Chinese people will go to temples for the New Year's and burn incense, burn money, burn prayers. And so when I did go to Guoqing Temple, it was, in Chinese they say ren shan ren hai, which means people mountain, people sea. There were so many people, and it was so cool, just the feeling, the atmosphere, so much smoke everywhere from the incense and the prayers being offered. And very, very great experience. So looking back at that, I'm like, okay, like what temple will I go to this year for New Year's? So yeah, looking back on that, I actually did accomplish quite a bit in the first month of 2023. Almost sets too high of a precedent or standard for this year. This year I've already done a little bit of traveling and done a few things, so I'm pretty okay. Never compare yourself too much, even if it's to yourself. Try and live in the moment, do things for their own sake, right? So right around, I'm looking at the dates, February 1st is when I did publish the first episode of the Fooding White Tea. And so that was the third episode of Tea Soup in February 1st. And looking at all the tea stuff I was doing then, it was still highly dominated by white tea, which makes sense. That's what I was really, really excited about. Those episodes were some of my favorite to make. And it was really cool to be able to record those episodes of Tea Soup and then kind of envision what I wanted to do with this project. Because after doing Fooding White Tea, I'm like, well, there's a whole lot of other teas I need to start talking about. Another really funny thing about looking at all of these photos, I look at the tea photos and I'm like, oh, that's a really good tea. Those are really great teas. I'm really happy we found that. Another thing I was doing is I was sourcing teaware for Tao Teaware. And I look back where I was in January of 2023, and it's almost embarrassing. Like the teaware that I was sourcing, that I was looking at, it was not very good. It was like very scattered, not really cohesive. The idea was almost there, but not quite there. We were looking at the historical types of different teaware, different kilns, different styles, and we're trying to build out the website like that. But what we kind of came up with was a lot of just like images that were like, okay, like this is the Guanyao, this is the Junyao, this is the Ruyao, but they weren't the best iconic pieces of each. And Tao Teaware has come such a far way And it's cool, especially if you look at the YouTube videos that we've been doing. Last year it was not up to this level, and then like you see the progression that we've made in a single year, and it's really really phenomenal. Like we're working with studios and they can't keep up with how many teapots we need, and we're really just like when they show us like when Zhang Yin Chao takes out the kettles from his kiln and he's like, hey, I just opened the kiln, here's what I have, and I'm like, I'll take all of them. And he's like, okay, I guess I'll get making again. And it's really cool to see and feel that kind of transition. So anyways, what I was really trying to do with this episode is kind of talk about all the things I did in 2023. And one of my favorite things beyond tea soup was my month off where I got to travel through China just for tea. And so I've been working in the same English school for, 6 years now. Essentially, I took like a year off when I was in Chaozhou and I tried to give myself the visa. It didn't work. But I've negotiated so that I get April off so that I can just do tea sourcing. And so my favorite thing that I did was that month of April, I packed a backpack full of like 2-3 pairs of pants, a couple shirts, underwear, socks, not so much because I plan on doing laundry every like third day. And I brought powdered detergent. I brought my camera, my drone, a few other pieces of teaware, and I was just ready. And I was like, okay, I'm going to leave my house for a whole month and just travel through the mountains of China. I remember posting about it on Instagram with my bag and being like, is this enough for 1 month in the mountains in China? Yes or no? And like a lot of people were like, oh yeah, I could do it. But it was very close to like 50-50. Like most people were like, that's definitely not enough. And I was kind of on the fence too. I'm like, is this going to be enough? One thing that I didn't bring at all is entertainment. I know it kind of sounds silly, but like I didn't bring a book. I didn't bring like any ways to like entertain myself other than like headphones so I could listen to music. But having a month away and being like, okay, like will there be any downtime? I know they'll be traveling and stuff like that. There might be some quiet nights, but like it was by far 100% enough. Like I only brought my iPad. I didn't bring my computer. And so all the work I had to do was on the iPad and stuff like that, designing the tea wrappers, the pu'er tea wrappers. I remember doing that on the mountain with my iPad because they're like, we're going to press it tomorrow morning, send me your image. And I'm like, okay, I'll make that right away then. But really, it kind of sounds a little arrogant to say, or kind of strange to say, but I felt invulnerable by the end of it, where I'm like, just with one backpack, I can live in the mountains of China, like wandering around. Like, of course, I'm staying at hotels, I'm staying at hostels, I'm staying with tea farmers. But at the same time, I had this supreme feeling that I really didn't need very much. And, you get into this with anthropology, like different cultures have different levels of affluence and different ways to say like, oh, how much is enough? How much do you need? And so for me, this month in the mountains really showed me like, I do not need much. I mean, if I'm out in the world, if I'm surrounded by tea, if I have this course of adventure that I need to do. And what was really difficult during that time was kind of keeping up on social media because there was so much going on in my actual life. I could barely take a breath and post about it. And so I started getting religiously into, posting every night about certain things, updating the story, which I'll probably do this spring as well, but already at 45 minutes, 43 minutes. So let me tell you real quick, just the overview of the rest of the year. I really focused on January, I guess, but that's kind of how busy this year has been. That's really, really wild. So places that I've been to for tea this year was, there was the Shaoxing for the off-brand dragon well, the Dafu Longjing, the Big Buddha dragon well. Then I went to the Dongting Peninsula in Suzhou, outside of Suzhou. I looked at the Biluochuan there. I went to Westlake area, saw the dragon well production. Then I went to Chaozhou, saw traditional Chaozhou culture. I went up to Wudong Mountain for the very first time on Wudong Mountain, and I met Wen Zitong. Amazing. You guys have heard these 3 experiences so far. And then after Wen Zitong, I went down to Chaozhou again and spent some time with Kemin Laosher, my teaware master, my teaware teacher who throws incredible pottery. Really patient, incredible guy, Kemin. I spent some time with Zhang Yin Chao, who's exactly 1 day older than me. We're like, have that Yuan Fen friendship where we just talk to each other like, we're old friends. It's really great. Every time I go to Chaozhou, I see him and we just hang out and drink tea. And he's just incredibly passionate about teaware. He's always showing me pictures of teaware that he likes, different teaware that he's gotten from other people. It's really good atmosphere, really good feeling to get. After hanging out with Zhang Yin Chao, I went straight to Yunnan. And let's see, where did I go first in Yunnan? Oh, that's right. I spent 1 day in Kunming and then went out to Linsang. And Linsang, you'll get that full story here soon, so I won't tell you too much about it. Went out to the Dashui Shan, and then I went back to Yunnan, or back to Kunming for a little bit, met up with Bitterleaf, Jonah, and Kumi. And that was really fun. That's when they found out that I also have a side job where I'm teaching, and they were just like, wait, what? And then after that, I went down to visit Paul in Waituti in Menghai. And then I went over to Mengsong to Huazhu Liangzi, source some tea there. And then I immediately took a flight from there back to Hangzhou to meet up with a friend who was getting ready to leave China. That was a really nice small trip because we were able to get some of that running tiger spring water, climbed over the mountains, brewed with the people at 9 Trees. Really nice. And then I met Alex and Xiaoyan in Lu'an in Anhui, and we looked for the guapian. And it was really cool. We were looking for guapian and yellow tea. Eventually we found, guapian and yellow tea. The yellow tea took us a long time to find. Again, that'll be another episode too. Maybe the guapian will be another episode as well because we found a pretty good source, but not the authentic Bat Cave source, which apparently is very impossible to find. But anyways, that was most of the spring trips. Nope. Then I went back to Fuding for white tea. And that's when I bought all the tea that I was going to press throughout the year. The pressing with Zhang took a really, 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 really frustratingly long time. And so this year I'll probably be pressing with Cho instead of Zhang. Even though Zhang's quality was really good, this year I'm excited for pressing with Cho because Cho just got his factory finished where he can press all the tea cakes himself. That'll be really cool. My gosh, where's all the time gone? Yeah, I did not get very far into this review of last year, but at the same time, enough to orient myself for this year. Things I'm excited to do. I'm really excited to go back to Yunnan, get a lot more pu'er. I'm going to go back to the Longjing area, get some Dragon Well. I'm really excited to explore, just the different regions in Linsang and then down in Menghai. I'm excited to rent a car, drive through the mountains, and kind of test my own luck, if you will. Another thing I'm excited about for pu'er is doing blends this year. Last year I did just all Trin Liao, which is all single origin pu'er productions, and press them into cakes. This year what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the higher qualities, the good qualities of certain things, and blend them with each other, see if I can make something even more sweety, see if I can make something mixed between sweet and mineral. Now that I know all these regions a little better, now I can start mixing them. And Paul was gracious enough to send me a bunch of other mixes and kind of showing me stuff that he's doing. So hopefully I've internalized a little bit about pu'er mixing that I can really start experimenting with that this year, which should be really, really fun. Another thing I'm excited about is to try and find some Taiping Hokui. I got a good connections last year, but didn't have enough time to actually get out there and do that 10-hour hike into the mountains. And so this year, hopefully I'll do that. I want to get out to Wuishan and see their production as well. They usually happen a little later in May though, so it's a little difficult with my teaching job. I'm excited for sourcing more teaware and getting out to different studios, getting out to different production regions, because if you guys haven't checked out Tao Teaware yet, do it because we're blowing up. It's really awesome. I'm really excited about what Dart is doing, the content he's creating, and just the quality material that we're sourcing. It's really, really exciting where I can finally feel like I'm taking my same kind of passion for tea and putting it right into teaware. And so that'll be really exciting to grow this year. That's probably one of my most excited areas for growth. That and video development, how to record, how to edit, how to just in general make better content. Because that was another really fun thing about this year, is seeing that development. Another thing I want to do is spend some more time out in Hefeng, in the Hubei house where we have all of our woofers. I think we've had over 6, maybe 7 or 8 different woofers out there. Alex right now is creating another cooperative with the Lo Shui Yuan people, and they're kind of doing their own thing, which should be really interesting for creating our own specific products. And this is where the One River Tea Cooperative can kind of extend the idea of this true cooperative style where if somebody wolfs out there and they're really into it, they can join the production cooperative in Hubei, in Hefeng, and actually create their own tea, work their own tea garden, and have a stake of ownership with that. Really, really excited to see how that develops and how that manifests and what it looks like. And hopefully this year we'll see a lot of stuff. Alex is getting ready to go to a really cool, huge cooperative convention in Hangzhou in the next week or so. That said, hopefully this year we will have our very own One River tea, yellow tea, white tea, green tea, and, start creating our own specific products. So there's a whole lot to look forward to this year. There's a whole lot I did last year. I guess this episode was way too much content to put into a single episode, but I'm doing the slow episodes of region by region, exploration by exploration, tea type by tea type. I'll continue doing that this year, and hopefully by the end of this year, Tea Soup will maybe even start having guests. Who knows? Anyways, this is Derek from One River Tea and from Tao Teaware. Until next time, guys, brew happy.